Spent my last dollar getting here. One-way ticket, and you're talking to me about healing through belief.
You're a man looking at the world through a keyhole, and you've spent your whole life trying to widen that keyhole, to see more, to know more. And now, on hearing that it can be widened in ways you can't imagine, you reject the possibility.
No, I reject it because I do not believe in fairy tales about chakras or energy or the power of belief. There is no such thing as spirit.
That's a clip from the 2016 mega sci-fi hit Doctor Strange. And this scene really captures the scientist at the tipping point.
We are made of matter and nothing more. You're just another tiny, momentary speck within an indifferent universe.
You think too little of yourself.
Oh, you think you see through me, do you? Well, you don't. But I see through you. What did you just do to me?
I pushed your astral form out of your physical form.
What's in that tea? Psilocybin? LSD?
It's just tea. With a little honey.
Of course, wouldn't it be great if it was that simple? But the reality is, as we know, the transition from the materialistic scientific paradigm that we're enmeshed in to what lies beyond is anything but clean. And there's a lot of hanger-oners, as today's guest, Dr. Philip Goff, has experienced.
A philosopher who's a very good friend of mine, a very warm, empathetic guy, very kind, cares about the world, but he doesn't think consciousness exists. It's always incredible to me that, in a sense, he thinks, no one has ever really felt pain, or no one's ever... I think one of the big problems with that position is all of scientific knowledge is mediated through consciousness, right? You only know about electrons because you have conscious experiences of cloud chambers and things. Thinking that you could have scientific evidence that consciousness doesn't exist is a bit like thinking astronomy can tell us that there aren't any telescopes.
But I guess one of the questions for me is, how much of this hanger-oner stuff should we tolerate, should we accept as just part of the change process versus calling it for what it is? In academia, it's really easy. Who gets the grants, who gets promoted, who doesn't get promoted, who doesn't get tenure, and they get pruned off the tree. And at the end of the day, you wind up with what we have now. We wind up with you debating with Jerry Coyne, which, again, I know people push back when I say this, but he's just really incompetent. I mean, I've had him on the show, and he just blows, like you pointed out in your debate with him. He just gets major things wrong that he's supposed to know about. And yet he's put forward and propped up. University of Chicago, been around forever. And this goes on and on. So that's the social engineering project. Not that people don't legitimately believe, they believe. It's just that the people who are really thinking this thing through are not presented as credible. This was a very fun chat with a very bright guy who's doing some great work. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Dr. Philip Goff. Today we welcome Dr. Philip Goff to Skeptiko. Philip is a philosopher and consciousness researcher at Durham University in the UK. He's the author of Consciousness and Fundamental Reality. He's got a new book coming out titled Galileos Air, a Manifesto for a New Science of Consciousness. He blogs at Conscious and Consciousness. If you see a theme here, hey, this guy is all about consciousness, and that just makes him a perfect guest for what we love to talk about here on Skeptiko. Philip, I'm really glad we were able to make this happen finally, and thanks so much for joining me.
Great, thanks for having me on. It's good to chat.
So let's start out. Tell us, who is Dr. Philip Goff?
Yeah, well, I'm a philosopher at the Durham University at the moment, and I've worked in a lot of different places over the last 10 or 11 years. And I guess my main focus is consciousness. I guess more generally, I'm just really fascinated by things that don't seem to fit into our standard scientific picture of the world, or the things that it's really hard to fit in there. Consciousness being the obvious one. but also, other things like value, for example. We tend to think there are, facts about value. It's hard to see how they fit in with the kind of facts we know about from natural science, or abstract objects like mathematicians tell us all sorts of cool things about numbers and sets. What the hell is the connection between that kind of abstract realm and the concrete world of tables and chairs? So, I guess I'm just interested in how all these things fit together, and how we can have a world view that can accommodate, not just the things that empirical science, that observation and experiment tell us about, but other things we have reason to believe in, like consciousness, for example, how we can fit them all together. I guess that's the big thing I try to do, really.
Yeah, I like, as I was preparing for the interview, and I forget where I ran across this, but I love this story, early childhood story. You say, I asked my parents, where are we? You say, hey, I was always interested in big picture questions. I asked my parents, where are we? And then you have a great sense of humor and you added, but maybe that's because we just moved into a new house.
Yeah, I asked my dad about this in preparation for this interview. I did, did I show any signs of early interest in philosophy? I guess I've been interested in philosophical questions as long as I can remember, really. And I was asking my dad, how far back that went. And he actually said to me when I was 5, I think it was 5, I can't remember now what I said in that. Yeah, I asked why are we here, but it was, as I say, I have to confess, it was, we just moved to a new house, so it could have been connected to that. I don't know, but
well, I think it's a great story, especially the way things turn out. I mean, it is interesting because a lot of people do not have a passion for these kind of questions, which to me always seemed fundamental, even in my life when I was running off doing other things, business primarily, chasing money and doing that kind of stuff. I always had in the back of my mind that I'd like to get around to answering these fundamental questions. Do you ever wonder why more people don't seem to have this on the top of their to-do list, that is, to get to the bottom of this?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's partly to do with the very kind of scientistic culture we're living in. I think people don't really know what philosophy is. They think, it's the job of science to tell us, what the universe is like. Maybe it's a job of philosophers to make us feel a bit better about it or something. But, it's the job of science to tell us what the world is like. And I guess I think we're going through a phase of history where people are rightly, blown away by the success of physical science, and the extraordinary technology it's produced. And, that leads people to think, oh, this works, right? We've got something that works. And to sort of put all your faith in that. Whereas, as we might get onto, I guess, in my view, the reason physical science has been so successful is because it's always been focused on a quite narrow task, roughly telling us how things behave. And it's done very well focusing on that narrow task. But there's lots of other things we know about the world that, don't quite fit in there, such as consciousness. I mean, and, consciousness is the most interesting because on the one hand, it's so hard to fit into our standard scientific picture of reality. But on the other hand, it's so hard to deny it exists. Nothing is more evident than the reality of our feelings and experiences. So, we have to account for it somehow. It has to fit in there somehow, but it's so hard to make it fit. So, actually, I mean, things have changed a lot. I'd say,
But hold on, full stop, because I always worry that even casting it that way is, I think, conceding too much to materialistic science. From a philosophical standpoint, consciousness, your consciousness, is really the only thing you can be sure of. And contrasting that with this theory out there, this unproven and in a lot of ways falsified theory that the world is out there, that the world is measurable, that the world is a consensus among all of us. I mean, that is just falsified over and over again. So do we, even from the beginning, because of the power of science in our society, do we concede too much even at the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree with you to the extent that I think what is known with greater certainty is the reality of my own consciousness. is there really a table out there that's questionable? Is certainly not known with certainty. But if I'm in pain, it's very hard to deny the reality of my pain that I'm immediately aware of in my experience. So I think, Descartes at the start of modern philosophy back in the scientific revolution got that completely right, although I don't agree with him about a lot of other things. But I suppose it depends what you mean by science. I tend to distinguish physical science from a more expansive conception of science. Physical science being focused on observation and experiment and quantitative analysis can be captured in quantitative vocabulary mathematics. I don't think those resources are much good, at least for giving a complete account of consciousness. And I think they were never designed for that purpose. But what I like to move towards is an expansive conception of science, sometimes called the post-Galilean science, where we take the observation experiment, uncertain as they are. I think they're important for informing our theory of the world. But we also take the reality of consciousness as we immediately experience it as a datum at least equal, if not more important than observation experiment. And we try to put them both together and try to find a theory of reality that can account for both. And I don't people are really in the mindset of thinking of science like that. They think of science as the job of science is account for the data of observation and experiment. Once you've done that, job done. But I think that, no, there's something else. There's something else we know is real. And if we can't account for that, then our theory is incomplete. So I think we need to move to an expansive conception of science where we take consciousness as a datum in its own right.
Yeah, I hear you. I keep wanting to go further, and I guess that's been one of my aims on this show, because I started with believing there was this legitimate divide, and this legitimate question about the hard problem of consciousness, which, now I come to understand is such a misnomer. I mean, what's the easy problem of consciousness? It kind of misses the point from the beginning, but that led me to an investigation of frontier science, parapsychology. Here are folks saying, wait, I can play by the rules of the game. That is the scientific method. And I can show you that consciousness doesn't work the way you think it does, that an epiphenomenon of the brain model of brain-based consciousness falls apart from these parapsychology experiments. And then when you start pulling all that apart and there's all the squabbling back and forth, hey, take it one step further. Go to the near-death experience science experiments published in peer-reviewed journals. And now you're totally off the reservation. There's no way we can get back to that dopey, materialistic, science, brain-based neurology nonsense. What about that path? So my poke at you is I don't see Philip Goff parapsychology. I don't see Dr. Philip Goff near-death experience. Aren't these probably the best examples we have of science that undermines this materialistic consciousness idea?
I guess so. I guess you're critiquing materialism perhaps from a different angle. I mean, my approach, I guess my philosophical education, we were taught that the only options, you had to be a materialist or a dualist. You had to think, like a materialist. You could just explain consciousness in terms of the chemistry of the brain, or you're a dualist and you think consciousness is outside of the physical body and brain, which is maybe from what you've just said that more the direction you aim in, perhaps. I guess I've always found both of these problematic, and for a long time I was kind of disillusioned with it all and thought, none of these options work. But I guess what I'm just interested in is a general picture of reality that is able to bring together, what we know about reality from observation and experiment, and what we know about consciousness from the inside, as it were. A general theory of reality. And then, obviously we want to do empirical work to fill out the details, and people will argue over that. And You can push in your direction, and I guess the more conventional scientists, for better or worse, I don't mean to say conventional in a positive or a negative way, will push in the opposite direction. I want a general framework that can fit in consciousness, whatever the science tells us. So I guess I'm working, different people work on different things. I'm working at that general framework. And part of the reason, my last book, The Consciousness of Fundamental Reality, was a very academic book. It's probably a bit more accessible than a normal academic book, but it's still pretty, inaccessible in some ways. So the purpose of my new book is a very different kind of book, very much aimed at a general audience, very much trying to get this general framework out there that's getting more known and causing a lot of excitement in academic philosophy, but trying to get it out there to a broader audience, to scientists, to thinkers more broadly, so that we can start to try and or fill in the details of this view, bringing in more of the empirical science. But I guess I'm working at that more abstract level that abstracts from those specificities. Does that make sense?
Maybe. I'm going to push you a little bit on that for a second, but tell us about that book. It sounds interesting. Galileos Air, that immediately draws us in. What's the general premise?
So I guess the big argument is that the reason we have a problem of consciousness is because of the way Galileo designed physical science. And hence, if we want to solve the problem of consciousness, we need to rethink what science is. A key moment in the scientific revolution is when Galileo says, mathematics is to be the language of the new science, right? But what is often forgotten is the philosophical work he had to do to get to that stage, right? Because before Galileo, people thought the world was full of qualities. Thought the physical world was, there were colors on the surfaces of objects and smells floating through the air and tastes in food. And this was a problem for Galileo because it's hard to see how you can capture these qualities in mathematical language. How can you capture the redness of red in the abstract language of mathematics? So what Galileo did, and this is the start of modern science. What Galileo did was he gave a philosophical reinterpretation of reality, right? He said, I don't think those qualities are really out there in reality. I think they're in the soul, they're in consciousness, they're outside of the domain of science. The job of science is to focus on the quantitative aspects of matter, what you can capture in mathematics, size, shape, motion. They're the only things that are really in the physical scientific domain. So he introduces this dualism, this radical division between between consciousness and its qualities outside of science and the quantitative mathematical physical world. And so this is the start of mathematical physics, and it's been incredibly successful at what it does, but it was never intended to be a complete theory of reality, and it was always premised on taking consciousness and the qualities of consciousness outside of science. And so if we want a complete theory of reality that includes consciousness, we have to find a way of bringing it back in. So I think if Galileo was to time travel to the present day and hear about this problem of giving a physical explanation of consciousness, he'd say, of course that's impossible. I designed science to deal with quantities, not qualities. So I think, that's been the problem of consciousness has been written in from the start, really. So that's the kind of starting point of the book. Yeah.
I always point to the famous quote that's attributed to Richard Feynman, but I think it was actually someone else. But, in the early 1900s, when the great quantum physicists are really trying to solve that problem, and they get to it and they go, hey, you know what? We can't. It's consciousness. We've run right up against the wall of consciousness, right? And then Feynman and his group go off and say the shut up and calculate thing. Do you know that story where they just kind of go?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So shut up and calculate to me is what we live in now, and what
Right.
The only problem with that is that we kind of ignore the fact that we took a philosophical sidestep to the problem, right? So we ran into the wall and we said, okay, it's perfectly fine to say, well, we'll just step around it for now and see what kind of iPhones we can make out of this. But then you do have to come back at some point and go, we did kind of sidestep the fact that none of this really makes any sense from a measurement standpoint. And that's where I guess I feel like we're still kind of tiptoeing around the dilemma with science in general, and I'm not even willing to concede that, you know, we have to compartmentalize it here or there. If we can't measure, then science is out of business. And everything we know about quantum physics tells us that at the fundamental level that we know of, we are no longer able to really measure things. So I just wonder if we're really there. And I listened to your interview, your excellent interview with Michael Shermer, and I sent you a copy of my interview with Michael Shermer, who is one of my favorite frenemies in this whole thing, because he sounds so brilliant, and yet it's total gobbledygook what he says. And when you push it to any degree, it just doesn't hold up. It doesn't make any sense. It's like listening to Neil deGrasse Tyson talk about consciousness. It's just silliness. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. So I guess one of the questions I posed is this worth saving? Can this be recovered in the way that you're talking about? Or is this fundamental shift that we're talking about really lead us in a whole different direction? And I guess I'd have to add one more problem is I always feel like philosophers and philosophy at this point, you know, philosophy is supposed to be king. Philosophy is supposed to be on top. And I think they've been pushed down for so long that they're kind of careful about saying these kind of things like, hey, you guys are all nincompoops. What you're saying doesn't make any sense. Consciousness is an illusion is laughable to a first grader. If you went and said, you know, your entire experience of your mom, your dad, your classmates, your family, that's all an illusion, they would laugh in your face. And yet we sit around and have conferences where we debate this, you know, and Sam Harris and Chalmers are sitting there going, well, do you think Dan Dennett really believes that? I mean, we're giving legitimacy to just these wildly insane ideas.
Yeah, okay. So there's a lot of things going on there. On the does people who deny the existence of consciousness? Yeah, I mean, a very close friend of me, to use the same term, mine, Keith Frankish, who's a philosopher who's a very good friend of mine, very warm, empathetic guy, very kind, cares about the world, but he doesn't think consciousness exists. It's always incredible to me that, you know, in a sense, he thinks, you know, no one has ever really felt pain, or no one's. So I guess, how do people get to that position? And you know, I think one of the big problems with that position that I often put to Keith is, you know, all of scientific knowledge is mediated through consciousness, right? You only know about electrons because you have you know, conscious experiences of cloud chambers and things. You know, you only know any scientific experimental data because you have conscious experience of your instruments. You know, so in a way, thinking that you could have scientific evidence that consciousness doesn't exist is a bit like thinking astronomy can tell us that there aren't any telescopes. You know, it's like, or it's kind of like another analogy. It's like believing someone who tells you that they never tell the truth. You know, it's sort of self-defeating. So I think there is, and you know,
I always think of the Albert Camus quote, there's only one philosophical question, suicide. So, I mean, if you really believe, and I mean, I don't mean to be too harsh on that, and I'm not sure, you know, exactly how he meant it, but the way it's interpreted, I think is beautiful, which is, if you really believe that there is no such thing as your experience, then you're living in a complete, worthless, meaningless existence. And you can't even cop out by saying, well, you know, maybe my kids will be different. No, there's none of it. You know, why would you persist in the game, you know?
Yeah, it's very hard to get in the mindset of that. People say about quite a big philosopher of the 20th century, Quine, was a huge influence. And yeah, he kind of famously towards the end at least, pretty much denied the reality of consciousness. But then people said, actually, when you read his autobiography, just about his life, and it seemed like he was startlingly lacking in introspection. So, he never seems to mention anything subjective. So maybe in a sense he somehow wasn't aware of, or at least he didn't attend to consciousness very often. But so yeah, I think he famously said, actually, if there's such a thing as consciousness, I'm not conscious of it, or some little witty thing. Anyway, but why are people led to that, I think, is the question we need to ask. I get into the detailed, techie, philosophical arguments, but at the end of the day, they don't really convince people. You've got to get the big picture narrative of why people are in that mindset. And that's really what I'm trying to do with this new book. That's why it's framed in terms of going back to the start of the scientific revolution. Because I think people have this idea. Why is Keith Frankish or other people, Daniel Dennett, led to that? Because they're blown away by how successful science is. You've got lights and hair dryers and men on the moon. And they're impressed by that, and it is impressive, but it's drawing the right moral from that. So they think, oh, well, it's so impressive, that must mean it can tell us everything. Whereas I say it's so impressive because it was never supposed to tell us everything, because it was always focused on this very narrow task. And I think if you can persuade people of that narrative, that big picture of, yes, physical science has been successful, but you draw a different implication from it, things can start to change. But yeah, I don't think I agree with you that I don't want to take these people seriously, though. I think there's I don't know, these questions are hard, these questions are very abstract. I'm happy for all sorts of people to defend all sorts of different things, and see where we end up.
Okay, let me kind of come at it a different way, because I don't disagree with you on that. And I certainly agree with you that the accomplishments of engineering over the last century certainly are mind-blowing, and you just can't get past them, and they are overwhelming. But I think there's two other things at play that we have to consider. I think they're at play, and we can talk about whether they are or not. But one is our understanding of consciousness, this limited understanding, this nincompooppery about consciousness as a social engineering project. So I sent you a link right before the show, and I apologize for not sending it too far in advance, but I didn't think about it. But there's recently been a huge dump of CIA documents related to their projects related to psychic spying, Project Stargate, which we've talked a lot about on this show, but other projects as well, Grill Flame, and there's all these other ones, the men that stare at goats thing. The point of all that is that for the last 50 years, those organizations and operations, both in the U.S. and in other countries, have gone way past all this. They go, well, that's silliness. Of course we know that consciousness is real. We know that extended consciousness in these ways that science clearly can't understand, we know that's real. So is there a little bit of gaming of the system going on? Let's let all these folks just go along with that idea, and let's not necessarily introduce this new idea to the general public, and that is that we know that consciousness is much more expansive. So let's start there. Is there potentially a social engineering aspect to our limited understanding of consciousness?
That's a very interesting proposition. It's not... I guess I spend a lot of time arguing with materialists and people who don't believe in consciousness and people who have very different views to me. I guess I'm pretty persuaded that people actually believe that, and I think I understand why they believe that. It's something to do with being blown away by the success of technology or something. So you're saying now that
just to be clear, I mean, the two are not mutually exclusive. I mean, the way social engineering works is we just let the game play, and we just lay down the cheese where we want the rats to go in the maze. So, in academia, it's really easy. Who gets the grants, who gets promoted, who doesn't get promoted, who doesn't get tenure, and they get pruned off the tree. And at the end of the day, you wind up with what we have now. We wind up with you arguing with, who's the guy, the religion guy, the Jerry Coyne. It winds up with you debating with Jerry Coyne, which, again, I know people push back when I say this, but he's just really incompetent. I mean, I've had him on the show, and he just blows, like you pointed out in your debate with him. He just gets major things wrong that he's supposed to know about, and yet he's put forward and propped up. University of Chicago, been around forever, and this goes on and on. So that's the social engineering project. Not that people don't legitimately believe, they believe. It's just that the people who are really thinking this thing through are not presented as credible.
Coyne might be good at, I don't know him particularly his work, but I guess he might be good at what he's doing. Like Dawkins and Tyson and these people. I mean, as far as I know, I'm not an expert in their field, but I think they're good at what they're doing, but they get a platform to speak on issues wildly outside of their area of expertise. And I think that's part of this not understanding what philosophy is, this scientific culture. And I guess, look, I'll read the things you've sent. I haven't, had time, since.
Without reading those, Philip, in general, you understand the proposition is that this stuff goes on. Like, so the remote viewing research, the MK Ultra research is all about consciousness. So all this stuff has been going on for 50 years at this deep level of consciousness that totally stands in contrast to academic understanding of consciousness.
Right, I don't know. I just don't know. I'll have to look into it. I mean, I guess I feel like I have a decent explanation of why people like Jerry Coyne, like Tyson, are believing the things they believe, even though, to my mind, they seem crazy. But then you're now telling me there's this other explanation involving things that are just generally accepted, that it's sort of being hidden or something. I mean, I guess I just have to look into that. I guess it's not something I have had a great deal of experience of. So
yeah, I don't know what there is really to look into. Well, I mean, because we'll never know, right? I mean, we'll never know to what extent these people are propped up, or to what extent there's another agenda. To me, it's kind of like back to the parapsychology and near-death experience science stuff. Like near-death experience science. At this point, over 200 papers published in peer-reviewed journals, a literal, almost complete consensus among people, researchers, mainly in the medical field, who've studied near-death experience, say, yep, by the best way we can look at the data, the only way we can look at the data, consciousness seems to survive bodily death. And if you're not comfortable with bodily death, it seems to survive these brain states that we do not understand how they could possibly produce consciousness. So, we're in no man's land here. It doesn't make sense to come back and talk about neuroscience, quote unquote, until that problem, if you will, or that question is resolved. And yet we continue to do that. And not only that, there's this huge backlash, which on one hand is understandable, that, anything that's going to totally change the paradigm and cause you to lose your long history of research is going to be rebelled against. But they're all the same to me. They're very related. So,
well, I mean, let me tell you the way I think about neuroscience. At the end of the day, what neuroscience gives you correlations between certain things happening in the brain and certain kinds of conscious experience. So you can scan people's brain and you can ask them how they're feeling, and we can get some data about correlations, and then we can start to think about that. I take it, well, I'll ask you in a minute. I mean, I take it maybe you can agree with that understanding of neuroscience. Maybe you disagree. But so I just think that's completely neutral on any sort of philosophical theory of consciousness. Because, I mean, that people have this idea that neuroscience is supporting materialism, and you're querying that from one angle. But actually, it's a non-starter anyway, because neuroscience just gives you correlations at best, let's say. And that's not a theory of consciousness, right? Because to get a theory of consciousness, we want to explain those correlations. Why is it that, certain things going on in the brain sometimes at least correspond to consciousness, certain conscious states. The dualist can give one explanation, the materialist can give another, the panpsychist, my own favorite view, can give another, and we can fight over it. But neuroscience in itself, I would just say, is neutral. So I don't think you need to. So I would say back to you, I guess, I don't think you need to worry about neuroscience, because properly understood, it's just neutral data, right? It's not a theory of. It doesn't depend on materialism or anything like that.
Yeah, but that's not what neuroscience thinks. That's not what neuroscience is built on the idea that consciousness is a property of the brain. It's an epiphenomena.
I don't agree with that. I think.
Who are you pointing to? I mean, Sam Harris, who's the guy that, all the people I've interviewed, but put that aside for a second, because near-death experience, we're totally off reservation on that, right? Because we no longer have those correlates. We have consciousness, and we no longer have the correlates, right?
Right.
So the brain is now measurably dead by the way that we define it. And people are having these profound conscious experiences. And we know that because when we carefully study it, they're recalling things more significantly than people that don't have near-death experiences, and impossibly, if it's true, things that occurred when their brain was essentially dead. So the whole thing is shattered. I just don't think we can put all the pieces back together.
So two things, I guess. One thing, this might sound like a pedantic point, but I don't think that challenges neuroscience. I think that challenges certain theories that people might abstract from neuroscience. They might say, that they think, consciousness is never. Like, you're just giving a different theory of the correlations. You're saying sometimes you have consciousness when you don't have anything in the brain. So that's a different kind of view of the empirical. But the neuroscience I would say, is neutral on that. I think you can say, I'm fine with neuroscience. I just disagree with materialism, which some people, I guess many neuroscientists are materialists, but I want to say that's separate from what they're officially doing as neuroscientists, which is building correlations. I think, you could agree, even if you think consciousness can exist outside of a brain, you can still agree that there are many correlations, like feelings of hunger tend to be correlated with, certain bits of the brain and so on. So I don't think you need to deny neuroscience. Anyway, that's maybe a slightly pedantic point.
No, it's good. I like it. I just looked up on our friends at Wikipedia, the most untrusted source on the internet. Neuroscience, the understanding of the biological basis of learning, memory, behavior, perception, and consciousness, described as the ultimate challenge of biological sciences. No, I think these guys claim that they are understanding the biological basis of consciousness, along with learning, memory, behavior, and everything else.
Well, that way of describing it is in tension with how I think of neuroscience. Or maybe there's a fight here over what neuroscience is. I would call I love neuroscience, and I try to stay up to date as possible. But consciousness itself is unobservable. You can't look inside. I've never heard anyone deny that who believes in consciousness. You can't look inside someone's head and see their feelings and experiences. All the neuroscientists can do is see what's going on in the brain. And so it seems to me to follow from that really what they're accessing, if you're just focusing on what they can get at through observation, it seems to me all they can get is correlations. They might then, take themselves to offer some theory of how consciousness is explained in terms of brain processes, and I would question that on philosophical grounds. But yeah, maybe there's a fight here that needs to be had over what neuroscience is. Yeah, look, I guess we're both challenging materialism from different angles, right? You're challenging it on empirical grounds. You're saying there's this evidence that it's false. I don't know about that. That's not something I've looked into a great deal. You can send me stuff and I'll look into it and think about it. I guess I'm challenging it on philosophical grounds. I just think for me, the essential issue is that consciousness is a purely, physical science works with a purely quantitative vocabulary, whereas consciousness is an essentially qualitative phenomenon. It involves qualities, the redness of a red experience, the smell of coffee, the taste of mint. And you can't capture those kind of qualities in the purely quantitative vocabulary of physical science. So I think, I think really materialism is incoherent on philosophical grounds because it's trying to, if you're going to have a purely quantitative vocabulary, you're never going to capture those kind of qualities. So I would challenge it on philosophical grounds, whereas I guess you're challenging it from a different, more empirical angle.
No, I like that, and I like what you bring forward with that. And hey, like you say, we are really on the same side here in terms of throwing stones at scientific materialism as it applies to consciousness. It's just a good chat to have, and we've kind of covered some ground here in terms of understanding the pushback on materialism. And we say, first, we understand that people are scientists, if you will, and to a certain extent, the general public, although I think the general public is really kind of more on our side when you really break it down and start asking the questions about, do you believe in love? Do you believe in the connection you have with other people? Even if you ask people if they believe in ghosts and spirits, which are way outside, there's a significant number of people believe in that. So I think the public is really kind of on our side, who's outside of this loop is a relatively small group of materialist scientists who we don't understand. And that's one of the things we've been processing here is what's the agenda? And you've suggested that part of the agenda is they're just blown away by the accomplishments of engineering. And the iPhone is frickin' fantastic, even though I'm an Android guy. That's fantastic. So great, hats off. And then number two, we said there's also the potential for social engineering. And I'm definitely on board with that, and you not so much. The third thing I think that I want to bring up, because you do have an excellent blog, and people should check it out. You talk about not only consciousness, but then you roll that into social issues and political issues and stuff that's going on. So the third thing I want to point out there is I think part of the reactionary thing that we get from mainstream materialistic science, I think, is on religious grounds. And you touched on this in a recent blog post that I was alluding to because it raised the ire of head priest Jerry Coyne at University of Chicago, one of the last remaining raging atheists. But you titled it Religion, but Not as We Know It. So I thought that would be an interesting, maybe final topic to talk about here today, and then we can get back and talk some more about your books. But tell me what you were going for there and how it relates to these issues of consciousness.
Yeah, well, that was the title of the blog post, and that was my response to Jerry Coyne, But it was following on from an article I published in the Times Literary Supplement last week called Believers Without Belief. So I was exploring alternative approaches to engaging with conventional Western religion like Christianity, Judaism, Islam. So one of them, for example, what's known as religious fictionalism. So the religious fiction is someone who, goes to church or temple, prays. They think the contentious propositions of religion, like, I don't know, God exists or Jesus rose from the dead, they think they're false, strictly speaking, right? So that sounds like a kind of contradiction. But the thought is that there's a certain value that certain people as individuals or in a community maybe get out of religious practice that is independent of whether these, the discourse is literally true. So there are stronger and weaker forms of this. A really strong form would be someone who has, the same worldview as Richard Dawkins, but still goes to church. And there are people like that, although it's maybe difficult to see the motivation. But, a more moderate form would be someone who believes in some kind of transcendent spiritual reality, but doesn't believe in a personal God, doesn't believe in the God as traditionally construed. And so they engage in Christian or Judaic ritual and discourse, but they take that as non-literal, as metaphorical, conceiving of the transcendent as a loving parent, for example, as a person, and that's understood as an important part of the practice, even if it's not literally true. And actually, this historically was a very mainstream in Christianity, certainly a very mainstream position. Aquinas's view comes close to this, and it's sort of been forgotten about, I think, since the scientific revolution and the Protestant Reformation, where we start to get these wars with science. And so, I'd just like to remind people of, I think there's a lot of people who think, a lot of people who call themselves spiritual but not religious because they think, I don't believe the sort of God as traditionally construed in Christianity, say. But, there are these alternative ways of understanding what's going on in there that, might be helpful for some people who could, fit with a way of fitting with their own personal religious views while still perhaps engaging with a cultural form that, is familiar to them and, more suited to them. Anyway, that was the broad.
Spoken like a true academic philosopher. You're kind of on the outside looking in here. People are drawn to religion because they have an underlying spiritually transformative experience. And they have it in all sorts of different ways. And then they try and relate it to these these institutions that are propped up. I mean, do you believe there are such things as spiritually transformative experiences? Do you believe there are such things as extended consciousness realms where spirits exist? And I'm not going to pick on you if you say one way or another, but that seems to be the fundamental question.
Well, let me say this. I mean, I guess to some extent I'm agnostic. I'm definitely an atheist about the traditional conception of God, all-knowing, all-powerful, perfectly good, just because of the problem of evil and suffering, the problem of reconciling the suffering we find in the world with an all-powerful and loving God. I find that to be a very overwhelming case. But in terms of, so let me say one thing that actually I talk a little bit in my new book about mystical experiences. Now I've never had a mystical experience. I guess it's partly what you're talking about, spiritually transformative experiences. So I've never had one myself, although I meditate every day, but so I'm still waiting. But so I guess to that extent I've got to be somewhat agnostic. But what I do want to say, so I'm a panpsychist, which I guess we haven't really talked that much about, but I think that the fundamental nature of the material universe is in some sense constituted of consciousness. So I'm a panpsychist, but I'm a panpsychist, not for spiritual reasons, but because I think it's, the best account of consciousness, the best way of bringing consciousness into our worldview. But what I want to say is, if you're a panpsychist, so let me rephrase this. So I don't know whether these spiritual experiences are genuine insights into reality or whether they're delusions caused by something going wrong in the brain. But if you have a panpsychist worldview, there's much less pressure to say they're delusions, right? That's what I was want to say. So a lot of people having mystical experiences claim that it becomes apparent to them that there is this pure universal consciousness that underlies all things, right? Now, if you're a materialist, there's a lot of pressure to say that must be a delusion, right? That's just something funny going on in the brain. But if you're a panpsychist and you already think the fundamental nature of physical reality is made up of consciousness, then there's not much more of a further step to say, well, maybe this universal consciousness somehow underlies these more mundane forms of consciousness. So you're much more open. So as a panpsychist, I'm much more open to that possibility. And, I think in general that it's panpsychism is a lot better for our kind of spiritual health as a worldview. So I'm much more open in that regard. But and I guess I would say I've had fleeting experiences when certain deep experiences of beauty where you do seem to have a fleeting awareness of something like that. But I guess I'm still somewhat agnostic, but very much more open than I would be if I were a materialist. So I think that's it's not the reason I am panpsychist. I'm a panpsychist, but I think it's an interesting and important implication of the view.
That's interesting. It's interesting how people come at this stuff. I have not had the firework kind of spiritually transformative experience either. I'm, meditation kind of guy like you, and I'm open to it. I'm waiting, like you said. I don't know if I'm waiting because we can't really wait, right? That's part of the thing about meditating, right? We're not waiting, we're just being present. But analyze yourself a little bit, because I think there's a lot of folks like you, Philip, and like me as well, especially guys. We need to think it and understand it really before we can feel it in some ways and before we can experience it. And it sounds like that's where you're coming from. You need to kind of grok panpsychism versus materialism before you're willing to venture in. Do you have any thoughts? Does that ring true to you at all, or?
Yeah. I guess I'm always thinking how things fit together. I want a complete worldview where everything fits nicely. Even sometimes when I've got a young child and I watch lots of kids films and they often don't make sense, and I'm thinking, oh, that doesn't make sense. I have to tell myself to stop being stupid and stuff. I suppose I'm a kind of logical guy. I want to know how it all fits into a logical, coherent worldview. So yeah, I guess, and I don't know, is that bad? I don't know. So I guess, yeah, a lot of people, you think of like Sam Harris or something who's really into meditation and spiritual experiences, but he wants to think about that in a way that fits with his general worldview. And yeah, I suppose that's fine, depending on your worldview generally is maybe going to affect how you understand it and what you're open to. And it could be it breaks at some point and you just have such an overwhelming spiritual experience that changes your worldview. But I guess because I'm already a panpsychist, it wouldn't be much of a change to my worldview if I suddenly came into direct contact with universal consciousness and saw it underlies all things. That wouldn't be much of a change to my worldview, because I already think, consciousness is kind of everywhere. Yeah.
Hey, Philip, when is the Galileos Air book? When is that coming out? Galileos Air, a manifesto for a new science of consciousness. Is that definitely going to be the title? Is that?
The subtitle has changed to Foundations for a New Science of Consciousness. But yeah, the title's the same. Yeah, it's coming out August the 15th in the US and the UK. Yeah, I'm just doing the proofs right now. So, if I could just say briefly, so the other thing that focuses on, so the Galileo stuff is why we have a problem of consciousness and why we need to rethink science. But there's also a positive story, which is the rediscovery of certain views defended by Bertrand Russell, the philosopher, and Arthur Eddington in the 1920s, who's incidentally the first scientist to confirm general relativity. So there's been a recent rediscovery of their ideas from the 1920s, which is causing a lot of excitement in academic philosophy and as a kind of whole new or rediscovered approach to consciousness. That's part of what I'm trying to promote in the book. What gives us is another problem with materialism. So you've talked about what you see as empirical problems with materialism. I've talked about the problems it has with consciousness. But what Russell and Eddington realized in the 1920s is that actually physical science isn't really telling us what stuff is anyway. So, in the public mind, physical science is giving us this complete story of the nature of space and time and matter. But what Russell and Eddington realized in the 1920s is that when you reflect on what the information you're getting from physical science, it's really just telling us about the behavior of stuff, what stuff does. And that's why it's so useful for like engineering, technology, because if you know how stuff behaves, and you can predict how it's going to behave. You can get incredible technology, but it doesn't really tell us what philosophers like to call the intrinsic nature of matter. What it is in and of itself, independently of how it behaves. So this is another problem in materialism. Even before you get to consciousness, it's not really telling us what matter is. It's just telling us what it does. And so what's the hell has this got to do with consciousness? You know, you can see the problem of consciousness is the problem of finding a place for consciousness in our worldview. How does consciousness fit in? And Russell and Eddington say, well, actually, there's this huge hole in our scientific picture that physics doesn't tell us what matter is. And so there's a potential for a way of solving both these problems at once. What we say is that consciousness is the intrinsic nature of matter. So, there's just matter. Physics describes it from the outside. It tells us what it does. But in its intrinsic nature, it's constituted of consciousness. So this is the positive aspect of the book that's rediscovering this really, what I think is one of the most promising solutions for moving forward with consciousness. So yeah, that's the other aspect. Sorry, that was a bit rambling again.
No, that's awesome. That's perfect. That's great. And so what will we find over at the blog? What's coming up? What are you working on?
In general, what am I working on? I don't know. I think about the blog from month to month, really, and what's annoying me or I don't know. I probably should write something about Brexit, which dominates the whole news here.
Yeah, I was reading a little bit about Brexit. I just didn't even want to go there. Why would you concede back to those idiots who are trying to, the people voted. Let's let the people's vote matter for once.
Well, I don't know about that. One of the things that struck me coming back to Jerry Coyne, I was proposing the benefits of religion, and he's saying, oh, look, people are fine. Communities are fine as they are. But, I think we're living in a pretty messed up world in all sorts of ways. That there's the far right all over Europe. There's, Brexit crisis here. I think this is partly because people are lacking these shared structures of meaning, are lacking a worldview that makes sense of their lives and their self-understanding. So, and this is part of what I try to do in the final chapter of the book, actually go think about what implications panpsychism has for how we think about the world, how we think about the environment, and how we live our lives, spiritually and practically. So yeah, this is, so many philosophers are so kind of cold-blooded, abstract, focused on a specific issue and not forgotten how to look at the big picture, which is kind of crucial. But yeah.
Well, excellent. It's been absolutely terrific chatting, and I appreciate you going through allowing me to just kind of free flow it here and talk about so many different things. So I do hope people check out the new book. It sounds fantastic. And the first book is much more academically oriented, but this is cool. It will be the first one out on talking about the new book and your website as well. And I hope people follow your work. So thanks again, Philip.
Thanks very much, Alex. It was really great chatting. I've learned a lot.
Thanks again to Philip Goff for joining me today on Skeptiko. I guess the one question I'd have to tee up from this interview is the question of acceptance. We all get that biological robot in a meaningless universe is an absurd idea, but how much do we need to pound that over the head of stuck-in-the-mud academics and other ordained holders of power and influence? Boy, I'm tempted to answer that question, but I'm not going to, because I want you to answer it and tell me what you think. The best place to do it is on the Skeptiko forum, but you can reach out and connect with me any way you like, email, Facebook, which I never get over to. But anyway, the important thing is that we find a way to connect. Again, I always say this, but it's so true. This amazing thing that's going on of me sitting in this room, talking into the mic, and you popping those earbuds on and walking around and hearing this conversation is such a cool, amazing thing. So let's close the loop a little bit. Let's send an email back and forth. Let's jump on a forum and talk about what's happening when we do make this connection. I hope you do that. I'm ready for it. I'm waiting. I hope you take the next step. Of course, do stay with me for upcoming Skeptiko episodes, and be sure to check out the back catalog, all available for free download at skeptiko.com. Until next time, take care and bye for now. So thanks for watching this video, and if it wasn't really a video, but just an audio stored as a video, I apologize. But there's more videos out there as well. But please check out the Skeptiko website. You can see it here. We cover a lot of different stuff you might be interested in relating to controversial science and spirituality. A lot of shows up there, over 350 of them or so, all free, all available for download. So do check it out.